Hello, and welcome to In the Making, a series of conversations from North Bennett Street School where we connect with a range of new voices, fields, and perspectives. Before we get into our conversation, we want to thank the many supporters that make our programs possible, including the Massachusetts Cultural Council and our partners in craft. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Kristen Odell. I'm an NBSS staff member and host of In the Making. Today, we're speaking about fiber. We're joined by Panamanian-born, North Carolina-based soft sculpture and multimedia artist, Katrina Sánchez Standfield. Hi. And associate professor, Singapore-born associate professor and head of fibers at the University of Oregon and working fiber artist, Jovencio de la Paz. Thank you both for being with us so much. East Coast meets West Coast. Here we are. The circumstances by which we're together for today's program are so different. Jovencio, we met through our work colleague, Sarah Turner, who's the president of North Bennett Street School. And Kat, I saw your glorious magnified weavings in a friend's gallery here in Boston, and I fell in love and thought, this embodies hand skills and craft, so thank you. And I had been wanting to do a program with craftspeople who are at different and varying moments in their career, different and distanced moments in their career, which as far as I have read and I can see you both are, you're in different moments in your career. And for some reason, the complete contrast in your work just really sealed the deal for me. For whatever reason, maybe we'll find out on this program, your work with each other, it clicks for me somehow. And I hope that our guests will see that as well. And we're going to get into showing some of your work before we get into questions. We have a very brief slideshow for our guests, and I'm going to stumble around getting that going, and Jovencio and Kat will tell us about their work in their own words. So Jovencio, tell us what we are seeing here and about your work.
For sure. Firstly, it's such a pleasure to be here today. I am traditionally trained as a weaver. I began weaving in art school and learning on the 4-harness, very, very basic looms. But over the course of my research and my life as an artist, I became really interested in this relationship between the loom and modern computers, which, as it turns out, share a really, really direct kind of history. And these textiles are woven on what's called a digital jacquard loom. But the original jacquard loom, which was invented in the 18th century, used punch cards to create complex patterns at the loom. And as many of you might know, the first computers made by IBM also used punch cards in their software. So there's a very direct relationship between the weaving loom and modern computers. So what I do in the studio, I work between digital spaces and the loom. I create software, very simple computer software, basically that generates patterns. And those are captured at the loom. In many ways, the work looks very specific moments in the history of computer technology, which I'm happy to talk about later in the questions. But the software that I write reflect kind of the development of what we could call artificial intelligence or computational creativity. So these are all large-scale textiles, cotton and wool. I have sort of returned to a sort of painterly format, I'd say. I had studied painting originally in art school, but transitioned into fiber and textiles. But the sort of scale and the kind of intricacy of the pattern, I've always sensitive to the way in which cloth moves between many different realities, between the physical, the tactile, but also the optical and the pattern-based. So that's what you're seeing here.
Mm. Back here, just before I jump forward, are these smaller pieces on the left as well on the jacquard loom?
Yes, all of this work is woven on the Thread Controller 2 digital jacquard loom.
Got it.
Yeah.
And this piece on the right too, the black and white. Yeah, it's so beautiful.
Thank you. These patterns were generated algorithmically. I didn't design them so much, but I created sort of a software that took this very traditional waffle weave pattern and ran it through the sort of algorithm that produced this pattern. And it's quite open. I don't know if you have details of any of these weavings, but the surface is really it's kind of extreme in terms of the floating threads and threads not woven. It is sometimes risky using the computer in this way because I'm not controlling exactly each individual structure. So there's a kind of trust that emerges. Things get things fray easily, and sometimes things don't work at all. So it's often kind of though the computer feels a very rigid and mathematical, when we get to the loom, it becomes physical and it becomes fallible in all of these interesting ways. So there's like a collaboration that has to happen.
I've read something that you said that you're taking it really to the software's breaking point. And so is that what you're referring to here in this piece, for example, that it's like it could topple over and just completely fall apart and threads go crazy? Yeah, exactly. Or it could not.
And there are a lot of pieces that don't make it to the gallery because they are at sort of such an extreme physical kind of limitation. Oh yeah, here's some examples. So they're very dimensional, and though they look quite flat from a distance, there's actually this is a very traditional waffle weave structure that I applied these algorithms to. So it's actually quite dimensional and physical. And I like that question. Yeah.
Well, sorry, what is this material that we're looking at here? Because it looks more coarse than what we're seeing in the other pieces.
This is hemp. This is cotton and hemp. Yeah.
And what were you going to say?
I was just going to comment on, I'm always interested, like, because I work with the computer, we tend to think of the computer or digital technology as really like not physical, like it's sort of the screen is kind of like a non-physical place. But actually, like through the loom, I can make that space physical. Like I can capture that space as physical cloth, and then always, knowing that actually, like digital technology, actually is like there's huge physical implications of digital technology, like extraction of rare earth minerals or storing data in warehouses in Eastern Oregon. So like, I like to play with this idea of like what we think of as physical and what we think of as digital, and the loom is just a really direct place where I can explore that.
This overhead shot here really, I can see computational creativity in this, and I'm going to ask you to explain that later in the program.
Sure.
But you can sort of see this orderly chaos in this piece. I love that. And this, you mentioning the physical nature of technology, I'm glad you're talking about that, because just was speaking with one of our instructors at North Bennett Street School about a bookbinding instructor who is trying to make the case for books, leather bound books being inherently sustainable compared to digital technology right now. And there's just the notion that most people don't really understand that cloud-based technology still has a physical space somewhere, and there's this huge misinformation about that. So I'm glad that you're talking about it. They're just beautiful. And once we get through the slideshow, we'll share websites so that we encourage our guests to explore Jovencio and Kat's work on their own as well. And Kat, tell us about your work. I'm starting here with this little tiny mended pair of pants. It's a jumping off point for your bigger work.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a good place to start because my work that I'm doing now began with this kind of mending process, and this is like a miniature format of what I was doing. And so basically the way this process started was during artist residency, actually here at Katrina, where I'm at right now, where I was mending clothing to repair it and kind of also keep my hands busy, and just kind of dive into a process that was more about the time and just following my instincts as far as what I wanted to do with the thread. I had just completed my undergrad, and so there's a lot going on. That was actually the final semester of my schooling, was the year that UNCC experienced the mass shooting. And so I really was looking for some kind of process to process my own feelings and emotions. And so I landed on something that I had been wanting to do for a while, but I never quite felt like it fit in with what I was doing in undergrad. So this was my first opportunity where I was able to kind of just follow my gut and do what I wanted. And so that's where I started. I started by mending a pair of old Levi jeans for my partner. And that visual language that I was developing with the colors and the layering and these small mending, like woven areas, is what basically inspired the magnified weavings that I create now. So I took that thread and I decided that, or I figured there was a way that I could amplify it to take up more room, to take up more space and create installations, which is really the scale of artwork that I love creating the most. So this piece in particular was that very first piece in the residency. And so as I was mending and meditating in a way, I felt like it would be wonderful if I could share that feeling and process with the audience during the opening. So with this weaving, it has those extra knitted noodles, which is what I call those magnified threads, on the floor with simple instruction to kindly touch and to play. And so the audience was invited to come and add their own touch to the weaving, and it ended up looking so cool. It was so textural, so dynamic, and it was just such a great time. And it was great to watch people get hands-on and, you know, be able to touch this very tactile and voluminous work. And so since then, I've been exploring these magnified weavings in different forms. This one here is created with pantyhose instead of knitted noodles, and with the addition of like friendship bracelet beads. So I've recently started to incorporate a little bit of text, but yeah, so my work really is about exploring healing, community, a sense of play, sense of optimism as well. So as you can see, a lot of my works are very bright and colorful, they're vibrant. And I think I'm just really drawn to those kind of color palettes. And yeah, it's basically, I realized that the impact that I liked creating with my work was bringing joy, as opposed to maybe making really serious work like I used to in undergrad. And it wasn't it was really challenging to make as well. And so this, I think, I love the impact that it creates. So,
Kat, what's an example of a serious work? Because I have a hard time seeing you say that it's looking at these because they are so positive and joyful.
yeah. So I probably don't have any images on my website or anything like that from those undergrad pieces, but I would make work about women's rights, about rape, or topics that are hard to talk um, about um, war crimes, those kind of things, about climate change and tragedies there. There are a lot of things explored, right? But yeah, this is what I ended up gravitating towards.
Yeah. I have to talk about this because I'm a fan of lingua franca, as is my very best friend. And I was so excited that you did a collaboration with them. So this is a storefront in New York City. Can you just tell us briefly about this?
Yeah, so Rochelle and I of Lingua Franca, we linked after she saw my work in LA, and we just immediately connected because her work is so fiber based, and it incorporates color and texture through embroidering these knitted sweaters and crocheted vests and all this. So we decided on this collaboration where I was able to create this window display that was interactive again. So this was actually the first piece since the one that we previously saw from the residency that was interactive and that the audience could actually touch and play with, because we had that big gap with the pandemic where, you know, we had to be very careful and still have to be very careful about, you know, what we're touching and what we're sharing with others. So that was really fun to do. And so we have a few more pieces displayed in the store. We created this fun stickers on the outside. And it was interesting because Michelle also pointed out to a lot of people who came that they put a lot of social justice messaging in a lot of their work and their sweaters and things. And so she also found this as a moment of reprieve in a way where we could focus a little bit on joy for a moment.
Yeah, I can see that in similarity with your changing your direction from your serious work to this.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop share, and we're going to push your websites into the chat, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about all of this. And while I'm making this happen, who will speak to me about something about your background that led you to craft and then to fiber, if it was that seamless of a journey? Jovencio?
Sure. You know, it always seems, I suppose, so seamless in retrospect. But actually, it was very happenstance that I became interested in fiber. I was at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago for my undergrad, and it's a, you know, those of you who know, it's a huge art school, and everyone thinks they're a painter when you arrive in art school. And I really, you know, I had my heart really set on painting, but I found that the conversation that was happening with my peers in painting wasn't really the conversation I wanted to be having. I was really at the time interested in social justice, in stories about immigration, identity politics, sort of stuff that was reflecting my own experience. And it was kind of sad to me. I didn't feel like I could find that conversation in painting. So I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And really randomly, when I was filling in my second term classes after taking like all the intro to art classes, I asked a teacher, what should I take? And she happened to be a fiber teacher. And she said, you should try fiber. And then that's just like how your life changes forever.
Yeah, somebody just tells you to do it, and then you do it.
But it was really there. It was in fiber where people were having conversations about about labor, about justice, about identity, and it really became a platform for me to explore those topics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kat?
Yeah, I think my fiber journey started when I was a kid. My mom taught me how to crochet when I was 10. She was always sewing and doing things at home, and like hand making dresses for me. So I think it started then, but it didn't start in a more fine art way until I started undergrad thinking I was going to become an art teacher, like K through 12, because it just seemed like the most logical thing to do. But after semester, I hated it. So right across from there was the fiber studio, and I already knew a lot. It came kind of naturally, I think, and I was just very drawn to the materials. There were these like magnificent giant shelves full of just different colored yarns ordered by color, and I was just very drawn to that. So I took a class, and from there I just continued into that.
Exactly.
It was yeah,
the
that's
wall
the
of
one.
Yeah, it's always like that.
Or like any of us that walk into a knitting shop, just the walls of neon and gloriousness. Yeah, sorry, Kat.
No, you're fine. I have one here too.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's my favorite part of the studio for sure.
Yeah. You both come from social justice, well, wanting to speak to social justice with your art. So you both are clearly empathetic makers and artists. What does your process, how is your work healing for you? This might be tied into it's a bit of a two-part question. It's what do you personally feel when you're in your process? And what do you find healing? What is healing about it for you? And you can tell me just like a micro step in the process, or the journey through one piece of work.
I think now I find the most healing through the color in my work as opposed to perhaps the process of making. Um, I think that there's just this form of therapy in selecting color combinations or palettes. It's just like this kind of emotional way to work with the materials, where I'm just led by what I'm thinking as far as in the moment, as opposed to like this large plan or this big inward thinking. That's what I think I find was here.
I love that. That is broken down to the immediate moment when you're, putting brush to paper or needle to, fiber. How about you, Jovencio?
It's so interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about the word healing in my work. And I think it's interesting because I think I don't really know how to define the word healing in this particular context. It's interesting also because I think a lot of folks have, there's definitely this quality, a meditative quality, a therapeutic quality that comes from the repetition involved in basically all fiber. From knitting to sewing to weaving, has this kind of meditative quality. I've never experienced that actually. I find it reading makes me very anxious. A lot can go wrong. I always feel like I'm battling tangles or trying to keep tension right. And so there are lots of anxious moments actually. As I've been listening, as I've been thinking about this word healing, for me, I think a lot of the work I make, I don't want to say is like, it's almost like opening. It's like opening up something for me, opening up histories, opening up wounds of history, which I actually think is part of the process of healing. So I know I could give very specific examples about history of technology and colonization and the use of technology in the war in destruction. And so a lot of my research looks at those kinds of histories, but I think that the opening of those stories is maybe for me the first step necessary for healing.
It does. That makes a lot of sense. To me, that makes a lot of sense. And I go back to that. You experience anxious moments of anxiousness when you're, and so yes, maybe that is your select mode of healing. Everybody has their own way of grief and healing.
Sure.
But I completely understand the wanting to, walk into the fire just to sort of explore how you're digesting these feelings and ideas. And I mean, so that's curiosity as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, at the very least, I think it helps me feel my body and my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. What and also in the sense of something that you've also said, you think about how knowledge and experiences are transmitted through society in space and time, whether by language or by made things. Can you tie that sentiment into what we're just talking about?
Probably. I something I really love about weaving, and it's actually really like something I really adore about your work, Kat, is like there's this sense that every textile is like is if you look closely enough, if you can understand how to read it, every woven textile is also like an instruction on how to make that textile. Like you can decode a piece of cloth in that way. And it's very different, I think, from other ways of making. Like there's something very exposed about weaving. Like it is a pattern, it's a language that can be read on the surface. And so whenever I look, I love looking at the work of anonymous makers from, for better or for worse, or unfortunately sometimes anonymous craftspeople of the past. When I look at like a basket that's woven, it's like I can feel a transmission, like the way that their hands move through space are captured really clearly in the language of weave. And it can't be hidden, right? Like it's very hard to like hide things in cloth. Yeah. It's always sort of physically there. And so I feel like that creates this very immediate connection across, over the history of our species, and it's sort of there in the threads. They're each visible. You can see how the thing has come together. And as a weaver, I think you feel that in your own hands. You understand how someone moved this material through space.
I take that back to the
great point.
It is. I that does circle back to healing in the sense, well, for me personally, and the way I see, the way I've read and seen your work, Kat, as you reference mending is quite literally healing an object. I mean, you're, making something new again, and the process of that. I would be a subject of the knowledge and experiences transmitted through made things, through family, through mother, through grandmother, always having that hand motion happening in my life. So for me personally, it's so healing. And I feel that when I see your work. What about in each of your own words, and I think Jovencio, you just kind of touched on it, is what about, well, you touched on Kat's work. What about your work today that you're making right now carries on fiber craft knowledge of the past?
Sure. I'm reluctant to talk about it a little bit because it's still so new. And it's a project that I'm working on for the Halsey Institute in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had this very particular experience a number of years ago where my mom really wanted to learn to weave. So I bought her a loom, and like I taught my mom to weave, and then she taught her mom to weave. So it was like this reversal
Yeah.
of that generational knowledge. It was really beautiful, a really beautiful time. But it turned out my grandmother really hated weaving because she felt like it was very wasteful, like in the warping process, and you have to throw away a lot of yarn. And she comes from this sort of, World War II generation that you want to save every little thread. So what she would do is my mom would weave, and then my grandmother would take all the waste and tie them like thousands of ends of different colored yarns together to make these balls of yarn. And then they would weave blankets out of that waste material. Anyway, they're really beautiful prismatic colors, and you can see each knot, right? Again, that you can sort of follow the weft and touch each knot, which is like, you can feel that action. But my grandmother passed away in May, and those blankets they just vibrate with her. The touch is embedded there. And so I'm working on a project involving those textiles. I don't want to say too, I'm still sort of feeling out. I don't want to commit here to anything, but that they'll play. It's sort of this intergenerational collaboration, and again, trying to look at how her experience is directly physically embedded in this material. So
that's amazing.
I hope so.
How beautiful that you have the material.
Yeah.
What a gift. And that is so fascinating. Reverse generational learning, a new craft. I've never heard of that happening before.
I know, it was just happenstance, but a beautiful kind of there's poetry there that I feel very lucky to have had that experience.
Yeah. What about you, Kat?
Yeah, I think that one aspect that about my work that I really like pushing in this contemporary way is revolves around the scale of the work and how massive it is. When I think comparatively to like really small works that are done by hand, like in your lab, in the home, to kind of this big expanse of using like a knitting machine to help me create all these knitted noodles really in this faster pace, to be able to create these much larger works that you can have this kind of like larger emotional response to when it's almost like a wall that's right in front of you. So I would say that that's definitely one aspect. And then, I mean, it's hard to kind of get away from that generational passing down of knowledge and learning like so much fiber art from my mom, who learned from her mother, who every time I go to visit my abuela, she has pillows, like everything in her house is like hand done by her. Like all the towels have embroidery, like a flower or something. I have a towel that she made me that says Katrina on it, that she hand embroidered, and every pillow is done by her. I think like back in the 90s, there are these really popular like sock bunnies that you would make and then make like a dress with lace on it to cover your toilet paper in the bathroom. So I remember having like lots of those around. And I think that just really instilled this like love for textiles for me, and like seeing this like hand done quality and like putting time and attention into like these things that surround you daily, and that I think carry on like this kind of energy and love in a way, like love for like what's around you, caring for what's around you, and kind of just like having this kind of preciousness as well, just by not through like, you know, expensive materials or anything like that, but just taking what you have and like doing something beautiful with it.
They are very much love. There's a an image online of your work that was, I think, an interior designer used, and it was a gallerist, but it looked like it was an interior of a home, and it's 3 small magnified weavings, vertically stacked, and it, when I see it and I imagine that in my own home, I feel love, just the comfort, the softness, the color, going back to the visual of mending, and how just, soul soothing that is.
Definitely. It's like large scale mending of like this space. Like it kind of like links this side of the wall to this side, and there's just kind of like harmony in the middle. Yeah.
So you really want to go big. I mean, how big do you want to go? Because I know you do murals as well. You're painting murals.
Yeah. The bigger the better. I would love to like just completely cover an entire room one day. Or I am actually working on a project right now that will scale over 3 different stories. And so they'll be kind of like linked by going from floor to ceiling. And then there's this like hollow stairwell where you can see each floor and kind of see them connect in that way. And they also have like these like tendrils that will be coming down. And they kind of have this motion by coming over and then growing and then getting smaller. It's still very much like in the very beginning phases of the actual making of it now, but I'm really excited to kind of see how that, what kind of effect that has, like when you're physically standing in front of it and the light is shining in on it and you can see all of it from standing back and kind of just experiencing it, and then experiencing it also where it's kind of has this narrow hallway that's right in front of it where you can't help but stand like just a couple feet in front of it and also experience it that way. But yeah.
What is, for each of you, in a few words, I mean, you can say more than that, but I have other questions to ask, but in a few words, what are the steps in your process to get to large scale? I'm talking like, are you sketching and then painting and then blowing up? What is that for you? Kat, you can go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it starts typically with a sketch. It's usually digital. And then I use like a graph that's overlaid on it to figure out how long physically I need to make each color of knitted yarn so that when I am weaving it, the colors realign with each other in the relationships that I want to see them in, of the colors that are together. So sketch, figuring out the math, and then I knit all of the tubes, stuff them, weave them, finish them, attach the hardware, and that's that.
Mm-hmm. That was a few words.
Yeah, for me, I spent a lot of time on the computer. A lot of the textiles exist primarily as like numbers in my mind, and so I'm like moving around like numbers in the computer and to create these algorithms to sort of coax things to happen. And then so it's a very rigorous process. Actually, it's a lot of I should say I'm not a computer. I'm really not a computer programmer. I've worked with them a lot on some collaborations, and like I know very basic skills. So it's a lot of trial and error for me. But then, so that's a very rigorous kind of like, very, very precise kind of calculated process. But then like I'm constantly making collages with like cut paper and glue, or little sewing collages to sort of map out. And at some point, those two very different ways of working meet. And so they begin as these sort of, just as like language, numbers, and then little paintings, and then they build on each other in that way. And yeah.
Maybe this is where you two are connected in my mind, that you both start digitally and you end up with a very tactile cloth object. That's unusual to me. But Jovencio, I have a question. Did you ever see yourself getting into this much into the, ones and zeros and the tech, like this programming side of craft? I mean, you said you're tech,
No.
you're not a tech person, but you're doing it,
But I think that there's this funny thing when you talk about I am like just on the cusp of digital native. Like I didn't have the computer in the house. I can remember not being there, and then I remember the day it came and being like, wow. But that I think it is more and more like people often, when I teach like weaving certain structures, my students are like, oh, it looks like pixels. Weaving looks like pixels. They have this sort of realization. But I actually think that pixels look like weaving. I think it's actually reverse. I think that the grid, the way that the numerical, how the threads optically mix to create color, all of those things I think are actually like very similar. So digital, I think, sometimes feels really distant from the hands-on, but weaving is great because it is both like it's like a musical language. It's like there's something like when you read a musical score, it's like a very strict mathematical language. But then when you start weaving, the expression comes from knowing how to use the loom, and like you can start to improvise in these ways. So digital, I am very interested in that kind of fuzzy place between the sort of rigorous and the kind of intuitive. Not that intuition isn't rigorous or that rigor isn't intuitive, that meeting place.
Right. For both of you, and you don't need to go into it if you don't want to, what is something, so what's an unrelated to fiber craft that you gravitate towards? And I'm trying to go for something that's way on the other spectrum of fiber or cloth. And what is something that you do to soothe your soul? Like I think of you, Jovencio, your anxiety when you're waiting for this thing to be woven. What do you do to counter that? And Kat, what is something that you do to counter your art practice? So it's a two-part question.
I meditate a lot. Do yoga. Try to exercise.
You're a musician as well. Does that
music
help?
Is also stressful to me. No, it doesn't help.
It's just that's so funny.
I'm to answer, I guess, the first question. I'm also really interested in ceramics. Just as like a different form to create sculpture with your hands. So that's something I've been slowly playing with and planning to incorporate into my weavings. So I think that's really like a soothing way to work because I really like, the reason I think I like the large scale work is that it's I think I get really bored if I'm like just sitting in one place and like having that kind of like bodily needing to like weave under and like it's very physical. And I feel like ceramics can be very much the same way, but there's also that like contrast in the textures of like the soft, squishy, pliable thing, and then there's this like more like moldable, but like it becomes like this rigid surface, and you can do all these things to the surface as well. But as far as like relaxing stuff, I probably don't do enough. I think I find that through just like cooking my meals in the evening. I try. I know it's something I have to do every day, so I try and find like just peace in it, and like that moment where like you aren't focused on like many other things. I think that's like a good time to do that.
For our guests, if you have questions for Kat or Jovencio, now would be the time because we're getting to the top of the hour. So pass them our way. And while we're waiting for that, can you tell us briefly the spaces that you're in?
Yeah, I'm at the University of Oregon. I'm in Eugene, Oregon, where this is our weaving studio. These are the
And how
looms.
many looms? How many looms are in there?
We have 16, and plus this is the digital jacquard loom, which I use for my own work.
Hmm.
Yeah. Nice high ceilings.
Yes. And do you normally, or in a regular sort of school day, class day, is every loom being used?
Not always,
Yeah.
no. Sometimes students are working on multiple looms, different projects at the same time.
Well, I guess the easier way to ask this, how many students are in one program in that space?
Usually 14 is on a good year, but
Yeah.
enrollment has been challenging after COVID. But yeah, small group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
14 is a pretty good number. When I was in fibers, I was the only fiber student, so it's just me. But I'm at Goodyear Arts. We're like an artist collective here in Charlotte, and you can see this is like my studio, but we're in this like big converted warehouse space.
Mm-hmm. And as a Charlotte sort of native, where is Goodyear Arts in Charlotte?
Pretty close to the center city. Uptown is what we call like the downtown for some reason. But
yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's
never have figured that one out.
I don't get it, but I guess they wanted to be different. But we're part of this area called Camp North End, which is kind of like this warehouse district that they've been converting into like artist spaces, retail spaces, restaurants. So it's like very walkable, and like they're kind of just like taking this underutilized warehouse space and like putting people like in it and doing events, hosting free like movie nights and like all this cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. I had a question for you, Jovencio. I've read in your information that you consider tools forming the maker. Mm-hmm. And I can sort of understand that in the scope of that you're working with this digital machine. So can you speak to that briefly? And then can you also give me an example of how you might explain that with about a hand tool? How could a hand tool inform the maker?
It's like when I have new weaving students, they're always there's a really steep learning curve because the loom it does not really reference any other kind of machine or way of making that they might have experienced in like high school or middle school public art programs. So they're immediately confronted by this really rigid device, which seems like it can only do like very few things. And so rather than be able to demand a lot, like rather than be able to like, I want to draw that hamster on the loom, it's like we can't just enact whatever we want at the loom in the beginning. We have to sort of learn its parameters. And it's from learning those parameters that we sort of find how to express ourselves, I think, as weavers. And then those seemingly very strict limitations become very, very open. And so like we're formed through like our expression is formed through understanding that tool. And I think that's not so different from all kinds of tools actually, right? So like you pick up like a rib in ceramics. I know very little about ceramics. I heard there's a thing called a rib.
Yes.
And like your body learns how that edge, there's a feedback, right? It's not just that you're enacting your will on the clay. It's like the touch between the clay and the tool and the hand. There's like these adjustments, these very minute adjustments that occur. And there's, I think, great wisdom, like I love just studying the history of hand tools in general. Like, I had like a shuttle, like a boat shuttle like this. When I look at them in the studio, I can see like how they get worn over time and like what edges have been rubbing up against the metal part, the reed of the loom over time. And that tells me so much about the person or the people who are weaving with it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So there's always like, I always love these evidences of like And for me, I give up a lot of my expressive freedom, I suppose, to these algorithms that I use. But I'm interested in I'm always interested in the parameters of that for different makers. Like we gravitate towards certain tools, not just because they do something that we want them to do, but that they do something to us also. Like there's a touch back that I'm always interested in.
What you said that it sort of, I don't know what the word you just used was, but that these programs sort of stifle or suppress your.
I think I willingly give up some of that creative freedom.
Creative freedom. So okay, so the question I have around that is, you're willingly giving that up. What would happen if you did not willingly give? Like, what would your work look like if you did not succumb to the, like, what do you dream about that's not?
Yeah, I think that my I don't think I think about being an artist that way. I think about a really big influence of mine is I love Solowit and minimalist, the sort of really high minimalist artists who I love this idea he has, which is the idea is the machine that makes the art, right? It's instructional based art. For me, it isn't so much I think this is what I dream about making. I think that this kind of I love the chance operation. I love actually the risk of not knowing if this weaving is going to come out exactly as I like it. I think also if you talk to my past weaving teachers, they're like, that person is a really bad weaver. We can't plan out a design and execute it directly at the loom. And I've gotten better over the years, but I'm more excited by that feedback that the machine gives me, right? I like to discover the piece. I love to discover the textile as it's being made, and sometimes it doesn't work. Is that fair?
That is fair. I'm hearing you say this, and I'm envious of you're willing, you willingly walk towards the chaos of the unknown. You don't know if it's going to explode, but that's what you're going for. That's what you're dreaming about. And I feel a sense of envy because I went to music school, and very classical, rigid, and it still to this day I have a hard time improvising on my instrument. And so to hear you speak that way, it's a bit of a controlled improvisation. Isn't that would you say that's what we're talking about? Sure. Yeah. So you're moving me to maybe I don't know, maybe I'm just gonna remove a string off my cello and see what happens.
But not everyone is like that, No. I am envious when I see my really advanced students. They're they can pick up a textile and recreate the draft and weave it on the loom. I really appreciate that I've taught them how to go through that process, but it's not me. And I don't think they want to work how I work, they have different goals. And yeah.
Well, it's the admiration here too, is that you've landed there, that's the spot that you're comfortable in. And that's wonderful. And Kat, I want to just reference how admirable I find it so admirable that you took these little men's, jean denim men's, and you actually said, I would like to see these 50 times the size, and you made them that way. I mean, I think that's incredible. One of the first slides we looked at, when I see your magnified weavings, you can it's like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or something like that, where you have, when you're a kid, forget about that reference, but when you're a kid and you try to think about size, and what if something was massive, and what if you were tiny, or you lay on the floor and you look at the ceiling, and what if the house was upside down, and you're just shifting your perspective on the universe. That's what that makes me feel like, I love that.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. It kind of has that childlike wonder. And like, I think a lot of us, when we think back to joy, it's like when we're a kid was like the easiest time to like feel pure joy and pure like ecstasy and like excitement. And so I think that that feeds in perfectly to like how I think people should feel when they are, put in front of this piece where like most people just immediately want to touch it. And I think that's kind of like just a quality of a kid as well. Kind of like going back to that point where you're exploring through like many different methods, and like tactileness is one of those.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying, Jovencio? I think you might have some thoughts on this when you just shifting the scope of your space in the universe, in the sense of seeing things massive, seeing them micro. I mean, am I crazy? Did you ever, as a child, did you ever sit on the floor and look up at the ceiling and wonder if your house were flipped upside down?
No? Of course.
Yes, thank you.
I used to walk around with a mirror like under my nose and like imagine I was anyway. What are you asking?
Well, no, I'm just speaking to like that. That's what Kat's weavings do for me. They kind of explode the scale of our, the space that we live in every day. And I know that that's literally what they are, but I guess I'm trying to poorly express that that's the feeling that they give me as well, because it's like exactly a macro version of the mend on your jeans that I've seen a bunch of times now. Yeah.
But I also love this language that you used about mending space. Like if you were to sort of sew, how do you sew space? And that the thread might have to take on this scale that begins to mend space. And there's definitely for me a politics in that also. That I don't know. I often think about like I make large paintings that occupy a lot of space on the wall. That's like a way to think about it. And I remember, I feel like as an immigrant, as a person of color, as a queer person, I was always told to like occupy as little space as possible. Like, like don't demand too much. And at some point I was like, no, I want to demand the space. Like, I think that I have something to say in that space. Kat, I think you have something to say at that scale that's really important. That's like, there's a politic to that for me that's really important. And I embrace it. I try to embrace it.
Thank you. I love that. We're at the top of our program. And so I want to thank our guests. Thank you for being with us today. It's a beautiful fall day here in Boston. And Kat and Jovencio, thank you so much for giving us your time and your work this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thank you. And we'll see everybody at the next In the Making. And Jovencio and Kat, we will see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.